Burrows, you can begin when you're ready. I'll just go live. You can begin when you're ready.
Oh wow,
okay.
It's all on the screen. Look at that.
Yeah, everything's on the screen. Right, warm welcome to those attending, and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. Details of business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room, and it is also accessible online under the live broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if the microphone is actually switched on. So that does help and helps everybody. Also, we're not expecting the fire alarm to go tonight. If it does, we'll all follow Steve. He knows the quickest route out of this building, apparently. Although the fire exits are situated behind us here and we go out that way anyway. If you have a mobile phone, can you make sure it's either on silent or switched off, please? Because there's nothing worse than a phone going off halfway through the meeting. I think it would be beneficial for those who are watching on YouTube if we just go round the room and introduce ourselves. And I will start. I'm Councillor Keith Burrows. I am the chairman of this meeting.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Barnes and I'm the vice chair of the meeting.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Steve Tuckwell.
Councillor Colin Sullivan.
Good evening, Councillor John Morgan, substitute for Councillor Richard Lewis.
Steve Clark, Democratic Services Officer.
Good evening, I'm Dan Kennedy, Corporate Director for Planning, Environment, Education and Community Services.
Tom Campbell, Planning Policy Team Leader.
Good evening, Chairman. Alan Tilley, Transport Planning and Development Team Manager.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Councillor Scott Farley, substituting for Councillor Jan Sweeting.
Good evening, all. I'm Councillor Kuldeep Lakmana.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. We will start the meeting with agenda item 1. Apologies for absence, and we do note substitutions, Steve, but if you can reconfirm, please.
Of course, so we've had Councillor Sweeting and Councillor Lewis give their apologies, with Councillor Farley and Councillor Morgan substituting.
Thank you. Declarations of interest before the meeting this evening? Anybody got declarations to make? No declarations. Move on to agenda item 3, to receive the minutes of the previous meeting. They are shown on pages 1 to page 7. I won't go through each individual page, but as I call the page number, if you have any amendments to make, please indicate. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7. As there are no amendments, can we please take that this committee agrees minutes of previous meeting? Thank you. And to confirm, items of business marked as Part 1 be considered in public. Items marked Part 2 be considered in private. Currently, we only have items in Part 1. We'll be moving now to agenda item 5, which is, of course, is this select committee's review, which is electric vehicle infrastructure and future policy direction for the borough. We do have witnesses this evening, and I'm very pleased to say we have a Hillingdon resident joining us, Adam Heritage. Welcome to you, sir, and thank you for taking time out. I understand you work for the NHS. Is that correct?
It is indeed, yeah.
Yeah, I work for the NHS as well. I've worked for them for 32 years now, so I know how busy you are, and if you're stuck there, then something's gone down for you to still be there. So, welcome, sir. I think it's only fair that we do start with Mr. Heritage, because he's taken his time out, and as I say, works for the NHS, and time is valuable in the NHS. So, Mr. Heritage, what we would do, we'll open the meeting to you. If you can tell us what your experiences are regarding electric vehicle charging points, and also if you can give us your ideas on how, as a resident, we should be considering as a council what we should be doing for you now and in the future. So it's over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the warm welcome. So I'm afraid to say that my experience so far with Hillingdon Council in regards to getting an EV charging point or access to EV charging has not been positive. It's been rather negative. So my journey to get an electric car started while talking to a couple of consultants at work. We have a large number of consultants who all drive Teslas and have a little Tesla club where they park out the back of our hospital, which is very nice to look at. And from speaking to a couple of those, they explained that they were able to speak to their local councils, explain the issue that they didn't have a place to charge their car on their driveway. And it's predicted to be somewhere in the region of 40 to 50% of people in London are currently in that situation. So in a situation where they do not have a private driveway where they can park a car and have charging infrastructure installed on it. One of the consultants spoke to their local council and they were able to facilitate and have one installed on the road outside their house, and said, may as well get in contact with Hillingdon Council and see what's possible and what's not possible, because I hadn't been able to make much room at all. So I work central London. So for me, with the low emission zone expanding, I wanted, it's quite important that sometimes I need to be able to drive into work rather than getting the tube if I'm jumping between hospitals for my job. Started the process, looked on hillingdon.gov website, and there's no contact information, no way to say that you're interested, no way to step forwards at all. For my sins in the past, I have your parking permits on email from when I managed to illegally park, and they were able to sort that out for me, so thank you very much, they were very good. So I thought I may as well email them and see if they can point me in the right direction, and they were fantastic and pointed me across. Unfortunately, the reply I got set off a few alarm bells within me, and there was one sentence in it which kind of stuck with me and still sticks to me to this day, which I will please appreciate that many roads in Hillingdon experience parking pressure. This is where more people wish to park than there are spaces available. A parking space provided just for an electric vehicle takes the parking away from all others. And I kind of assumed then that was the viewpoint of Hillingdon Gov, that any parking spot which was designed for an EV or had the ability to facilitate EV charging was not providing a service for people who drove EV, but was taken away from everybody else. I've questioned it. I'm relatively well known as being a bit of a sledgehammer. Apologies if I do not pull my blows very well. I'm not the most diplomatic. Then within your EV team, it got escalated because the person I replied to clearly wanted to escalate me up, which is perfectly understandable. And that's when Dr. Tilley replied. And I was told that most of the council car parks offer free car parking if you have an EV, and I could park there. But I wasn't told a list of which ones or any information like that. I had to really chase to kind of try and get some facts of what I could do. The private car park offered some EV charging, but again there, I know that's not to do with you. I had to really chase to try and get anyone to reply to me. When I did speak to Dr. Tilley, I was told that they would keep a list of people who had contacted them, but not many people had contacted them, which I explained that may well be because you don't have your email available on your website at all, and I had to go through parking permits to get in contact with you. Since then, I found that there is a central London council scheme, and I can find the contact number within Hillingdon there, whereas most other councils will have a form you can fill in or information that you can give them to try and move forward to have an on-road charger installed, or where your closest one is. The one for Hillingdon is to suggest location near you, and that's it. And it's just an email address. There's no form, there's nothing to put in. So I spoke to Dr. Tilley and asked how many people within my area need to express an interest before this is taken forward. He couldn't tell me. How big is the area? of influence, of residents coming forward? He couldn't tell me. I then asked how many had been installed through this scheme, which is a question I often ask in the NHS of when you've got alarm bells going off of, well, how successful has this been? And the total installed has been 0. And that is the current system. So at that point, I kind of hit the walls. So I'm lucky my current car, I can go within outer London and there's no charges, but if I want to park at the hospital, which sits in the ultra-low emissions, then there is a large charge involved, £15 per day. So I find myself in a fortunate place where I can afford an electric car, but I can't afford a house which comes with EV charging, which I know a lot I do have, and it's been recommended that any new builds come with. But then from speaking to the estate agents, I asked how many of these do currently have EV charging, and I was told by estate agents it's highly unlikely to find a flat or a house which will come with EV charging. From my own research, I found out it's something that, like new builds at the moment, it's about 15%, 20% at most, will have EV parking and charging with them if you are lucky. So I found myself kind of at the mercy of Hillingdon Council, that if I couldn't get access to either have a charging point in a public car park near me, which was open at night where I could park and charge, or change from having 0 on-road charging scheme to having a few, Then I escalated because I wasn't happy with the response and pushed through to my local councilman. I didn't really get much response there. If I'm being honest, like I said, I'm a bit of a sledgehammer and I was a bit angry when I wrote that email, and I probably would have done a similar response to them. Then came across Councillor Barnes, and she'd been fantastic and helped direct me. I spoke to Councillor Riley, and that was when I decided to give up. At that point, I had to chase him 3 or 4 times to get any kind of a reply. There were multiple emails. I'm very versed in how to provoke someone to reply to you, and how do you give up on this project? Are you the right person I'm speaking to? If you're not the right person, I'm sorry if I'm wasting your time. Can you point me to the right person? And I eventually got a reply, and then pushed for that again. And the final reply I got from the one which made me kind of step away from it and think I'm not going to get anywhere here, was very different to what I understand the current government guideline is for councils. So I'm under the impression, you may be able to correct me, that central government are proposing that local councils are the body in charge of promoting on-road charging scheme, that there is funding available, but it is up to local councils to drive that. And from Councillor Riley's reply to me was the complete opposite of that. He said, when fuel originally came out, local councils did not back that. So therefore, it has been undecided if Hillingdon Council will back a charging scheme for people to fuel their vehicles. For me, that goes against everything in Boris Johnson's 10-point plan. Adopted solely by central government and London Mayor for the role of local councils for EV charging. So that's been my experience. Not the best, I'm afraid. Apologies for that.
No, thank you for that, because it's hearing from residents that's going to help us also put forward recommendations and help shape the way Hillingdon moves forward. Because we know what the government's plans are for electric vehicles. We know the deadline dates, etc., etc. So it is very useful to have a resident come to us and say, look, this is my experience. This is my experience of your website. This is my experience of lack of information, of forms, etc., etc. So it does help us get a picture from a resident's view.
Perfect.
And I'm sure, as you say, you work in the NHS the same as I do, and it always helps us to get a patient's and relative's perspective of what's happening in your organisation, because sometimes when you're in the organisation, you think the organisation's working. So
yeah, you don't see the forest for the trees.
So yeah, so that's fine. Councillors, anybody got a question for Mr. Heritage? Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Adam, for taking us through your experiences. I think, wood for the trees or fresh eyesight is something which would be really useful in this instance, and it's really interesting to hear about your experiences. I'm sure other councillors will have questions, but for me, what is the top 3 things that you think Hillingdon should be changing as a result of your experience? Because this is the right committee to be addressing to help influence policy going forward. So again, what would be the top 3 things that would help improve your experience?
It felt like there was no SOP in place, so I was getting different information from different people. I was getting told by one person that, oh, you've now been put into this group of residents, and if enough residents join it, we'll do this. And then I was told by a councillor, oh, it's not even been agreed that we're going to install anything. And then when I was looking at past records online, there's the last statement that had been made by, or that I could find from Hillingdon Gov, was saying that they wanted to have a on-road charger within 10-minute walk of all residents to be able to use. But clearly that had changed, and there'd been no update to the policy online or for the residents to know. So if I would have known and just been able to look online and just seen, we currently have no real plans to install on-road chargers. We have some in some car parks. These are the car parks, and you can park in them if you're a resident. My expectations would have been managed much better. It did feel a bit like a postcode lottery, and a bit of a, if I was in Westminster, that they're celebrating installing, is it 1,000, 2,000, I can't remember, on-road chargers, and here we are in Hillingdon with 0. So it did feel like kind of, if it just depends in which council I'm in, it's which way they are reviewing the government guidelines. So I'm a big fan of not having to talk to people in life. That makes life nice and simple. So if it's available there for me to see on a website and it's lovely and clear, and there's a form where I can fill it in and I can say, I have an interest in getting an EV. I currently don't have one. I would like to express my interest. I live in this area. That is, boom, on the website. Thank you very much. Done. I would just fill that in and send it in. Instead, I had to hunt to find the email, hunt to get to the right person, express an interest, and then be told the chance you're now put in a pool of people contact us. No, we don't do this.
Thank you for...
And then trying to argue, well, of course you don't get people. Yeah, apologies, I've gone off topic. So transparency, keep things open, having information there for me to be able to see, having the system to apply for it very easy to be able to see, rather than just an email address.
So if I could just, can I come back, Mr. Chairman? Just if I could just paraphrase what you're saying there, it's about access, consistent information, and expectations managed.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Lukmana?
Thank you, Adam, for being so frank with your experience of the website. And as the chair has already mentioned, the website not meeting your needs, I'm sure that that will go to the relevant committee, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Adam, for your testimony. I'd like to know what your, bearing in mind where we are with council and with EV points at the moment, what your feeling is about what your next steps are in terms of acquiring an EV vehicle, whether that sort of delays you until such time as Hillingdon makes the moves to install or arrange with other partners to install EV points. I wonder where this sort of places you and potentially your colleagues, as you've spoken about. Thank you.
Great question. So at the moment, as I'm sure it's a term you've heard of, there's something called range anxiety. So do I have enough range in my electric vehicle to get into work and back again? And the current guidelines from the government is you've kind of got 3 different types of chargers, and the type of charger that I need is not a super fast charger where I need to plug my car in for an hour. It's something where I can plug a electric vehicle in for maybe once every fortnight or once every 10 days, because I do probably 25 miles a day. So if I was able to get a car with a range about over 200 miles range, I'd need to plug it in once every week, maybe for one evening to charge overnight. So currently, we're looking at the pros and cons to have a car which, instead of charging in Hillingdon, I charge near where I work, and then risk that if I'm going away from Hillingdon, then I will only have the charge that I've got in it, or if I come back from a long trip, that I will need to charge it before parking the car. So that's my mindset at the moment, and it's a risk I'm not prepared to take for the additional worry and the time that would take to work around having an electric vehicle. So for me, it's not. For some people, that may be feasible to not have the option to park at home, but to charge at home, but only to be able to charge at work. For me, that's not feasible. So if we were to go away for a long weekend and then come back, I would have to make sure I had enough charge to get to work and then fully charge while I'm at work, or top up while I'm at work, drive home, repeat the next day. I think that would be a little bit too much anxiety for me, versus just being able to stop at a petrol station and fill up. And plus the cost difference of having something like a 55, 60 kilowatt battery versus an 80 kilowatt battery is £10,000 plus additional cost. So if I had a charger at my house, I could afford to have a much cheaper car, or one within reasonable walking distance.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Adam, I'd just like to thank you as chairman of this committee on behalf of all committee members for your honesty and your openness about your experiences, because as Councillor Tuckwell alluded to, this is going to help us moving forward from a resident's perspective as well. So I'd like to thank you for your time, especially as you informed us that you've been held up at work already. And within the NHS, when you get held up there, sometimes what you think is going to be half hour turns into 2, and what you think is going to be 2 ends up as 6. So thank you very much for your time. And our report will be going to Cabinet in the new year, early new year. And hopefully you will see some developments that we're going to put within our report going forward, and taking your experience into account as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, so the other witnesses we've got Alan. Welcome, Alan. Good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. And of course we've got Tom as well. Alan, some of what Mr. Heritage alluded to there does appear to fit into what we're going to put forward with the website and the forms, etc. Can you just run through, for us as a committee, what is currently on our website? Because from what Mr. Heritage said, it's not a lot. If you want to look up my charging points, closest charging point to my house, how do I get a charging point? I'm thinking to get electric vehicle, etc., etc. Can you just tell us exactly, if a resident comes on our website, what they're going to see?
Currently, Chairman, I must report that there is not any information available on the Council's website about electric vehicles. However, a lot of work is taking place, which I would like to share with the meeting. and I would hope that the meeting find it encouraging and would help allay any concerns that they may have arising from the useful contribution made by Mr. Heritage.
I think it will be useful. It will be useful if you can just run through what the future plans are currently for the website. Because, you know, I think every single councillor sitting around this table at the moment have this tick list. At the very top of that tick list, based on what Mr. Heritage said, is the website. Because if I was a resident and I'm buying an electric vehicle, and he's already alluded to the fact that, you know, he's got colleagues at the trust he works for, consultants, okay, fair enough, all got electric cars. They have our trust as well, for various reasons. But they live in boroughs, as you've heard there, that have got good infrastructure, they've got good websites to give their residents information and details, as soon as just plug it in, where's my nearest charging point? It sounds like he almost had to rip our website apart to actually get any information. So if you can just inform us or tell us what you're able to tell us, because I'm sure there's some that's still under review. So if you can, that would be very good.
Thank you, Chairman. May I give a background to the work that's been ongoing, and that I think as part of that we'll be able to capture the council's own website. It was in the springtime that I spoke to Mr. Adam Heritage, a local resident, and I know it's springtime because it was during the lockdown, and since that conversation I do believe we've come a long way, and I'd like to take the opportunity to go through with yourselves where we are now. Petrol and diesel car vans will cease being sold in 2030, and by 2030 it's predicted that between 34 and 49% of all car and vans fleet in London will be electric. There's currently 7,600 public electric vehicle charge points, and by 2030 the number needed will be between 40,000 and 60,000. And it's in response to this that this work has been taking place. I can just add, things are moving very quickly. 1 in 8 new cars registered in London were electric vehicle in 2019. 1 in 16 were electric vehicle 2019. It is now currently 1 in 8. So things are moving very rapidly. So what we have been doing is on the 14th of October, last Thursday, we published an invitation to tender. That was published on the Crown Commercial Services Framework, and the closing date for it is Thursday the 4th of November. The tender is inviting companies to supply, install, maintain electric vehicle charging points in public car parks and establish a wider electric vehicle charge point infrastructure across the London Borough of Hillingdon. Before writing this invitation to tender, we spoke to many providers in the council offices, and it was fact-finding for ourselves. With the tenders coming back on the 4th of November, we have 4 weeks thereabouts to evaluate those tenders, and then we need to get a report to Democratic Services ready for Cabinet to consider on the 6th of January, where the council can make a decision which company do we go forwards with. The invitation to tender has 3 strands, and if I just go through those one by one. There are electric vehicle charging points in public car parks. They were installed some 10 years ago as part of a project with the Ford Electric Company. I think it was Strathclyde University, Scottish and Southern Electricity. Residents were given the opportunity to drive an electric vehicle, provide feedback, which the university analysed and presented. Ford Motor Vehicle Company, for their part, got some good market research. Now, these electric vehicle charging points were subsumed as part of Source London, which was operated by Transport for London. That network was then sold to a company, Borough, but the Hillingdon electric vehicle charging points were not transferred across. In the meantime, those electric vehicle charging points were maintained on a piecemeal basis. As they broke down, they were repaired by the manufacturer. We are now in a situation where many of the electric vehicle they're all old, they need replacing, and some are not working, which I agree is a completely unsatisfactory situation. Strand 1 of the tender that's just been published is to invite companies to come in and replace those electric vehicle charging points in those council car parks. So, simple terms, the one that offers the best deal at the best price will replace those electric vehicle charging points. We're asking the tenderers to tell us what type they're going to replace them with, how many numbers in each car park, how will those electric vehicle charging points be upgraded, because the technology is moving very quickly. It could be that they're out of date within a couple of years and we would want them updated. How's the tenderer going to promote and publicise this new network that we're going to have in the borough? Which networks will residents be able, which members of which networks will residents be able to use? This is where it gets a little bit complicated. I liken it to mobile phones. You might have an Apple phone. Tom might have an Apple phone, but I'm with EE and you're with O2. There's 17 big player electric vehicle charging point networks. That's who you pay your bills to for the electricity you use. So we're asking the tenderers to make sure that we've got a good widespread of network so that people who drive electric cars can actually use the ones that will be in our council car parks. We're aware that there's grants available, and we're asking companies in their tenders to demonstrate that they're aware of these grants, and will their offer of electric vehicle charging points be dependent on grants? If so, are they able to make the applications on our behalf, though of course it would be, the signature would be Hillingdon's. We've even asked questions, how would they oversee the removal of those existing electric vehicle charging points? And to protect ourselves is, what would the council's exit plan be with this company? So that's strand 1. It's going to Cabinet, so they'll come back to ourselves on the 4th of November. We'll have 4 weeks to go through them all thoroughly. We'll have a report to Cabinet on the 6th of January, and then within the tender there's a requirement to have the first electric vehicle charging point installed and ready to use 1 month after contract award, with all 12 other public council car parks to have the electric vehicle charging points installed and ready to use 3 months later. So at that point we will have electric vehicle charging points that are the highest specification that I feel we can be proud of in council car parks where we've currently got these electric vehicle charging points that are not working or perhaps are very old models. Now, we are asking, as part of the tender, that we have a dashboard that we have in the council so we can see which electric vehicle charging point is in use, which one's not in use, which one's working, which one's out of service. And from that we'll also be able to download reports that I'll perhaps be able to share with managers and this committee so you can see how well these electric vehicle charging points are being used. In the tender we're asking for frequency of inspections, how do we report faults and how soon will they be repaired. And that's strand 1. And then strand 2 of the same invitation to tender is for the electric vehicle charging point companies to go away and look at 43 other public car parks, and they're invited to come back to us with an offer. Speaking to companies as part of the fact-finding learning exercise, I'm not sure what we'll get back, and it would be wrong to prejudge it, but from what we've been told so far, is companies are likely to offer an electric vehicle charging point free of charge, even give the council a percentage of the profit from the electricity sold. However, for the council's part, it's likely that we're required to lease a car parking space. They'll likely say 20 years, we might say 15 years. So, for Strand 2, 43 public car parks, what's the offer? Can you offer the high specification machine? What term lease do you require? How much income can the council be expected to receive? And then I find that quite exciting. What are they going to be offering us? Taking into account the way the electric vehicle charging point, the electric vehicle market is moving. Speaking to the providers before while the tender was being written, it was pretty attractive, some of the offers that they were making at that point. But I don't know, we'll have to see what comes back. And then the third strand is, it's really saying, okay, what can you give the borough? One of these strands being electric vehicle charging points along residential streets. It's quite often electric vehicle charging points in converted lampposts. It can also be electric vehicle charging points on standalone units. There's other things to consider. The electric vehicle charging points, if they're in a lamp column, would have to be next to the curb. Are the lamp columns capable of hosting an electric vehicle charging point? So we're asking what can they offer the council there, and then we're also asking them what can you offer the council by way of rapid electric vehicle charging points. Those are electric vehicle charging points that can charge 6 cars or more, and of course the car will be charged in 40 minutes, and so we're inviting tenderers to say, right, we know that they're looking at the borough, we know that they know the market very well, they'll have sites in mind already. Well, I know they have sites in mind already. They'll come back to us and say, we're interested in that piece of land, we'll be able to provide XYZ number of electric vehicle charging points. This is our offer. So it's all exciting to see what comes back through the door by the 4th of November. And I already know that we've got a meeting tomorrow. People are already interested. I personally would think we're talking a big contract. That's my impression, the way things are moving. So I hope that would give some comfort to Mr. Heritage, if he was here, that in the time since we spoke in the spring, we've come a long way, and hopefully there will be electric vehicle charging points in the council car parks early spring. Well,
that's good. I've got a couple of points from what you've said, though, Alan, if I may. Where you mentioned where the old charging points used to be run through TfL, etc., and somebody else come in and took them over. You said Hillingdons were never transferred over. Why? Was that because we weren't quick enough on the uptake, or they just didn't offer the transfer?
This took place about 4 years ago, and it was surrounding the legal issues with transferring the car parking spaces that the electric vehicle charging points were occupying, and there was hesitancy about entering into a lease, effectively giving up a car parking space to the company that would then manage what was Source London.
Right, okay, thanks. The other point, you talk about spread of networks, and you compared it to the mobile phone networks, EE3, O2, etc. Now, they all offer different contract charges. So if we're going to have a spread of networks, different networks, I think that's what you were saying, to make sure we've got a good spread, are they all going to offer the same cost to charge your vehicle? Or is, for argument's sake, Operation A going to be cheaper than going to somebody being operated by B or C? Are they all going to be on the same charging regime? Is that something we've built in and we've requested? Or aren't you able to say at the moment, because obviously the contract's still out to tender and this is a public meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. In the invitation to tender statement of requirements, Hillingdon is aware that there are various electric vehicle charging point networks in operation across the UK. Suppliers must specify which members of which networks will be able to use the electric vehicle charging points provided. And we go on. Hillingdon expects the user to be able to connect to any system using the latest release of Open Charge Point Protocol. So yes, we have asked questions about the type of network that our residents will be able to use. Clearly, it's more attractive if it's affordable to residents rather than if the prices are very high. And we will find that information out.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
So that's good detail. You've given good detail. We're probably all sitting here now thinking, what about the website?
I would hope that once this tendering process has been completed, the council, Hillingdon, will have an electric vehicle charging point network that we can be proud of and that we can promote on our website as members see fit.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Alan, thank you for going through the finer details on what's happening. But I do want to pick up on the website. You know, we're looking now at 21st century. Most people walking around mobile phones, iPads. Surely we should have something on our website just to advise our residents what's happening, what's going on, and for them to register their interest. I just find it's amazing that we haven't even got that, so that residents can't even see that we're looking into it, and that, you know, if you are interested, let us know. You know, and we can make sure then that they're in the loop. You know, it is sad. My daughter has got an ID3, and she's turned around and, you know, she still lives with us, and she says Hillingdon is the worst borough for electric charging points. And she said that you go on the website, there is nothing there. You know, it's time we've been able to start going back to our customers, communicating with our residents and saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're looking at doing. If you're interested, give us your contact details, give us your email address, whatever it may be. So that way, we're then communicating with them. Thank you.
Building on that, actually, Alan, building on what Councillor Morgan just stated there, if there was that in our website at the moment, where they can just literally fill out a form to say, I am interested, or we have an electric car, this is our postcode, surely that's going to shape when we come to looking at the strand where they're going to possibly use lamp columns to do on street. That's surely going to help the council be beneficial to us, because from what Mr. Heritage said, at the moment we got nothing.
Thank you, Chairman. We are receiving emails from local residents, and their contact details are being recorded. It seems like we're getting a lot, but it's about one a week, and each of those, of course, is responded to. London councils do host a page where all London boroughs are listed and residents are able to submit suggestions for electric vehicle charging points. We can quickly fix up a link on our council's website to the London councils. Maybe that's making it a bit complicated, but we could possibly done quickly. here's a link to London Councils, register your interest here. But there again, it's probably not a great deal of work by somebody very technical to get something up and running in a day.
Steve, I think you know where our first suggestion for recommendations going here. I have other speakers. Councillor Farley, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Morgan. Certainly there should be some sort of holding, at the very least, message on the website. I'm not okay with how many we've got currently, even if they're not in the best of conditions. How many we've got currently in the borough in these car parks? I know we've got in the supermarket car parks. They have them different varieties. For the ones that Mr. Heritage was talking about, where you sort of have them for a long time overnight to charge, I'm concerned about security of people's vehicles. So they're being yanked out and they're not. I don't understand. If someone's drive, they've got cameras and whatnot. If you're leaving it in a car park overnight, what's to say someone's not going to yank the thing out and sort of cause mischief? So I don't know how secure they are. And sort of leading on to something that I was thinking about, and the chair sort of touched upon it, was the cost. I don't know what the distinction is, or whether or not it's lower cost for a resident to have or to run an electric charging point from their home, so they're running off their own system, and whether or not those residents that are going to be using the system in a car park or off-street parking are going to be sort of disadvantaged because they're being charged a higher rate for charging their vehicles compared to someone doing it off their home energy network. So those are sort of a couple of things I wanted to ask about initially. But also, I'd also understand. So, Mr. Heritage contacted you in the spring. It's only fairly recently that this tender's gone out. I mean, it may be just the lead time that's required. But also during that time period, you sort of mentioned that there have been other contacts made by residents. I'm wondering what I'm getting at is why it's only fairly recently that the tender has been submitted, and whether or not we've had other residents in the meantime between Mr. Heritage and his clearly dissatisfaction with how things have, or how he's sort of been able to get information, or the lack of same, to where we are now with the tender going in, and what other sort of contacts have been made, whether any sort of dissatisfaction has been made by those residents as well during that period. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Picking up on the point of cost, I understand it to be the case that it is cheapest to charge your car at home. Charging your car at home, you can literally plug it into a wall socket, but doing it that way will take a lot longer to charge. Or you can have a charge point which will reduce the charging time down to 4 or 5 hours. And then, of course, there's rapid electric vehicle charging points where you can charge your car. 40 minutes is typically quoted. Security. Electric vehicle charging points in public car parks. Not all of our public car parks are open 24 hours. And that's why we're asking the questions of the tenderers. Why have you selected the type of unit? If it's going to be an electric vehicle, if it's going to be a car park, say in Uxbridge Town Centre, you'd expect people to dwell for 3 to 4 hours, 1 to 2 hours. Colleagues in parking services can give us that exact information. So we'd expect the provider of the electric vehicle charging points in their tender to tell us what type of charge point they're going to provide in the town centre car park. We would expect it to be something of a specification, let's say 1 to 2 hours. However, a car park that might be used by commuters going into central London all day, a charge point that works on a 8 to 10 hour basis would probably be sufficient. So for security, I don't really see it being a situation that people would choose to charge their car in a public car park overnight. they may well do, but taking into account some, I'm not sure how many of the council's public car parks are actually closed at night. And yes, we have been taking representations from local residents, and every one of them's been responded to. And from speaking to them, we've learnt, and it's helped us get to where we are and publish this invitation to tender. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I just want. I'm not sure I got the answer that I was looking for with regards to the cost and potentially it being a disadvantage to residents that would be parking and charging compared to charging at home. I'm not sure I got that from your answer. So what I'm trying to make sure is that or if it's possible to do so with the tender that's going out, that we're in a position where we're not, residents aren't disadvantaged. So they're looking to get a car, to charge it, to be economical, to be equal to what someone is getting when they're charging at home. I don't like the idea of this being this disparity between, and I'm not sure that came through in your answer. Forgive me, that's how I understood that. So I just get some clarity, please. Thank you.
If you were to charge at home, you're paying for your electricity just as if you're running your washing machine. If you're charging in the public car park, you're buying the electricity through a network operator who has got overhead. Sorry, Steve. My guess is you would be paying more. However, the council could discuss whether people parking an electric vehicle don't pay for parking, don't pay for a parking ticket. That's something that other councils do, and that helps encourage further electric vehicle use, further tackling carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. So the council could decide to bring down the cost of charging your electric vehicle by offering free parking for electric vehicle users. That's all for discussion when we see all the prices come back.
Okay.
There's a lot to be discussed.
There's a lot you can't say as well because it's a public meeting and the tender's still out. I have Councillor Tuckwell and Councillor Barnes still to speak, but Councillor Morgan's got experience, I think, of charging a car at home. So I'm going to bring him, if that's okay with you two councillors, I'm going to bring him in so that he can actually tell you what it's like to charge his daughter's car at home. Obviously, he's paying for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, to help Councillor Farley, when you plug in the cable into the car, it's locked into position when you lock your car. So you can't pull it out. It's deliberate. All electric cars are built that way so that people can't go around just pulling out the plugs willy-nilly. There are three types of charging. The electric plug, the 3-pin socket, that will take anything from 24 to 48 hours to charge your car up, depending on the car and how flat your batteries are. Then you have the standard one that most companies are using, where it takes about 8 hours to charge the car up. And then you do have the rapid charge, and that is 40 minutes to an hour, something like that, to get your car fully charged. Cost-wise, yes, at home is possibly the cheapest way, unless you live near a couple of the supermarkets where they don't charge. So you can actually pull up, plug it in, and you're not charged for charging. I won't mention the name of the supermarket, but there is one there, and they've been working with one of the car manufacturers to be able to do this, but it's free for all electric cars.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Tuckwell. Okay, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Tuckwell has given way.
Thank you, Chairman. My son, due to all the petrol issues over the last month, the diesel and the petrol shortage of the drivers, my son decided to get rid of his car and buy an electric car during it, and he bought a BMW i3 fully electric. I think the charging at home, yes, obviously, as Councillor Morgan said, it's just your general costs, like Dr. Tillier said. However, it costs a lot of money to get your charger at home. The quotes that my son Cameron has been given with the grant that the government give you are minimum £1,000 to get the charger at home. So you have that initial then outlay, even though charging overall will end up being less than going to another charging point. However, he does go to, because he doesn't have the money to get that charger yet, he's been going to local free charging points in supermarkets around the area, which have free parking for 4 or 5 hours during the day, and he'll go there for about an hour in the morning or whenever it fits in his daytime and charge it up. But what he's found, which is what I hope we don't eventually get, is there are so many that don't work properly. There are so many that are faulty, and so you kind of work out, like you find your favourite petrol station or whatever. You know where to go, and you know which ones are going to work, and you know what times of day are best to go. And he's already worked that out in the last fortnight by doing that. He still feels it's better than having a car and going to get petrol. He's so glad he's made the change, so glad about it. But he's taking a lot more time out to have his car charged in certain areas, and he has done it overnight. He has driven to a supermarket car park, left his car there overnight and charged it all night, and then walked back in the morning and picked his car up. He has done that, and his car has been completely safe, because that was the first thing I said to him, was, how does someone going to pull it out? And he goes, no, it locks in when you lock the car. Yeah. But I think overall, just some points, I think, as Dr. Tillier, you said, things are changing so rapidly, and I think this is becoming an extremely urgent thing for us to do as a council. I think we should have something on the website, even if it's just, like you said, a kind of back and forth thing, because the average person is not going to look on the London Council's website and think, oh, I know, I want to get an electric vehicle, I'm going to look there to find it first, when our website has everything on it anyway. It's got absolutely everything to think of, and I think it'd be good to get a build-up of a little database of who our residents are, and like you said, the sort of clusters of where they're all buying, the new people who are now buying, and the difficulties or the positives and things that we can learn from them, like we've learned from Mr. Heritage. And a question to you, actually, Dr. Tillier, is there any way in the meantime we could have some kind of arrangement with local supermarkets or car parks like the Chimes, where people do come shopping with their electric vehicles and they are our residents, they've got the Hillingdon First card? Is there nothing we could put in place in the meantime between now and next spring, when things start to make, we start to make changes for our residents to use, especially, like I say, we've just come out of this diesel issue, a fuel issue recently.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. One thing I will take away is certainly we'll get something up on the Council's website, and of course that will help the winning tenderers to decide where to provide electric vehicle charging points. But I can add that, having spoken to them, their knowledge of the market is very good. However, Hillingdon residents need the opportunity to express their own wish to have a electric vehicle charging point. I can certainly ask whether there's opportunities to partner with a supermarket or something like that to provide electric vehicle charging points in the interim before we get our own Strand 1 up and running. There's a very good, I believe the most popular app website is ZapMap for finding out where there's electric vehicle charging points. You mentioned your son noticed that there's good locations, bad location preferred. It is in our invitation to tender that we want to be quite sure that the electric vehicle charging points, when they're in place, are repaired immediately and we've also asked for this dashboard so we can see ourselves what the current situation is with the network. I know Tom's here. I can add from my highways development control work that when a new development is built, we do ask for electric vehicle charging points to be provided as part of that development. So all of the ones at Asda in Hayes, where there's plenty, all of those were provided by the developer at no cost to the council. When new houses are being built, we require 20% to be active electric vehicle charging points.
You're now treading on Tom's feet here, because Tom was going to tell us this shortly.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you. I had an electric vehicle once, but we won't go there. We won't go there. Right. I think for me, I think this debate has been incredibly useful, and I think it just shows how complex this subject is. We're sort of scratching the surface a bit here at the moment, and starting to get into a little bit more of the complexity. I don't envy the challenges that you and your team have got to face going forward, but it's pleasing to see that we've got phase 1 in tender is going to be decided upon early in the new year, and that's good. Phase 2, or Strand 2, I think we called it, 43 car parks that we're going to add electric charging points to. My question is, with you've got 100 spaces in a car park, how do we decide how many of those are going to be electric charging points? Because I'm conscious that not everybody's got an electric vehicle, and if we don't get that percentage and that balance right, then we could be causing parking stress or a problem further down the line. So that was going to be my question on that. The other point was, and it touches on the point around security, and yes, they do lock in and you can't really pull them out unless you really want to have a good go at it. But it's more about, if we're going to have access to parking out of hours, then that could be inviting other kind of behaviours with open car parks that I'm pretty sure that all councillors have experienced at some point, where you've got open spaces, with car meets and other kind of things which go on. So that's another challenge that we've all got to face. And the final point, I think, and again, if Adam is watching, I think, and I'm not going to go on about the website because I think that's all been said, but it really is about finding a way that access to information, consistency of information, and managing expectations. What was pleasing about Adam, he wasn't expecting there to be a whole, Uxbridge High Street to be littered with charging points like next week, but he just wanted to know where his nearest charging point was, and or even just hearing that something is going to be happening. And what you've shared with us tonight clearly shows that there is a plan in place, but it also, that having that plan in place has just highlighted how many other offshoot complexities are coming with this. So the point around percentage of charging points was really the main question in these 43 car parks.
Thank you, Councillor. Strand 1, we're telling the electric vehicle charging point providers, this is what we want. These are the car parks. We want the electric vehicle charging points made fit for purpose and working 100% of the time. Now, Strand 2, that's where we've got the 43 car parks. That's where we're asking a different question. It's more, what can you offer us? And it may well be the case that they say, well, thank you very much, Hillingdon Council, we're very interested in this car park, and we feel very confident that every car parking space could host an electric vehicle charging point, and we feel this car park would like to provide 30% of spaces with electric vehicle charging points. And the same company might say, well, thank you very much, we're not interested in that one. It's right next to Asda, where we know people can charge. We're not interested in that one. But another company might offer a better balance that we prefer. So yeah, we'll wait to see what they come back with. But there is a question: is how have you decided the number of electric vehicle charging points? So they may say, well, we want to do the whole of this car park, but well, why do you want to do it? We'll expect them to tell us, and they might say, because from our own market research, we know that this cluster of residents are going to be the early adopters and uptake in electric vehicle use. Have I answered your questions?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I just have
I was going to pick up and say, will we still have autonomy over it though? If they come and said the whole of this car park, we feel needs to have EVs in, charging points, but that car park we do 30%, that car park we think only 20%.
Yeah.
Are we seriously going to say, as a council, yep, you can take every single space within that public car park for an EV charging point? Or are we going to use common sense and actually talk it through?
I'll use the car park. Well, when we were speaking to the providers of electric vehicle charging points in lamp columns, their approach was, well, provide them at every lamp column, provide an electric vehicle charging point everywhere. And you thought, well, okay. The reason being is it means a fossil fuel driver and electric vehicle driver can park anywhere on the street. And so it could be the same for the car park, where the electric vehicle charging point provider thinks, I'd like to do 100% in that car park. It doesn't stop a internal combustion engine driver for parking in those spaces as well. It just means the drivers of both types of vehicle can park in any of the spaces.
Can I just pick up a point of clarification? And enforcement was going to be one, actually. But I think what you're saying there, Alan, is that the period between the 4th of November and the 6th of January is when you and your team will use your local knowledge of locations, vehicle ownership and all that kind of information to sort of judge whether or not the tender is fit for purpose, fit for Hillingdon. The second point, which is what you just touched on there, I know some supermarket car parks through private enforcement actually fine people if they park in an electric charging bay. So I think one of the complexities here, I haven't got the answer, is to ensure that our enforcement policy is fit for purpose as well, because we could end up alienating electric or combustion engine or whatever it works out to be. So, but thank you for your responses, very, very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Farley, you had another question?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tuckwell actually touched on much of it, actually. I just always sort of look at, and Dr. Lee, you've sort of touched upon it just in your last answer, sort of looking at the future of the, in terms of the plan. So, Strand 1, we've got the replacement of what's in there. As we get to Strand 3, it's then looking at the infrastructure on the roads and so on and so forth. Now you mentioned, I think, in your initial speech, was that the lamppost has to be close to the road side. I know, obviously, a lot of streets, I can think of numerous, where the pavement is very narrow, and where there are lampposts, there's not many of them. And even when they are, they're actually, I can think of one, actually, I think it's in Newsley, where the lamppost is on a very narrow footpath and it's actually in the middle of the pavement. So a lot of this, I think, you've got these integrations with the lampposts. What do we think about sort of what that's going to do in terms of where I mean, have you been at a stage yet where you can identify what kind of percentage of the borough is going to need to have an overhaul of lampposts? Obviously, I think there's upgrades of lampposts going on still at the moment with the actual types of light bulb that's being used. But do we know at this stage what kind of overhaul is required to either change? Well, you've got to upgrade them, but what is required to some lampposts, and what kind of numbers we're talking about across the borough to either install new ones because it's just not sufficient on a road, and those that are currently in existence that are going to need to be replaced to accommodate EV charging. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I am aware we've had demonstrations by companies of installing electric vehicle charging points in lampposts, and I know from companies speaking to the council that the council has been able to respond with what percentage of lamp columns would be suitable, would be able to host an electric vehicle charging point. in the tender, we have written, suppliers will need to make their own assessment of demand and consider technical issues such as suitability of lamp columns and any parking restrictions. So it's... I feel sorry for the people who are offering this tender to. They've got such a short-term time to get to know the borough and find out ways that they can work with the borough for mutual benefit. So all of the streets in Hillingdon, all very different, all different lamp columns, parking restrictions, and they've got to come to some sort of judgment of where they would like to invest their money at their risk. So yeah, they have my sympathy that they don't have a long time to do the tendering process. But yeah, that's back on them. You do an assessment. We'll provide the information you need. We're making available details of the electricity supply that's available that we know of. But ultimately, it's their assessment and their risk to go out there and do the research.
I think that it won't be until that tender process is over that we really start to look at, okay, what are the numbers involved as far as lamp columns are concerned. Certainly I know a few roads where they wouldn't be able to use them because lamp columns actually set to the rear of the pavement, so you couldn't do that. So not all of them are at the front of the pavement. So I think it is when the tender comes back, and I think what you're saying, Alan, is quite true. They've got a huge task to unravel and come back with a decent tender. So, yeah, definitely. Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Farley? And then we will move on.
I mean, Chair sort of gone on to that, but I was looking at the other availability for, obviously, got lots of high-rises, tower blocks and things in the borough. That may or may not have car parking, or private estates that have them. What are we doing in terms of working with those developers? So I understand that there's a requirement for new builds that having them in.
I think if we wait for Tom's presentation,
Thank you.
I think we're going to start touching on that. So I think that's probably the point to cut to Tom. Everybody in agreement with that? Okay, thank you, Alan. I'd like to thank you for your input this evening. It has been very beneficial to us. And as usual, your knowledge behind all this just supersedes anything. I've worked with you for many years, so thank you, and it's good to see you, and thanks for bringing that this evening. The committee really appreciate that. So, Tom, it's over to you from the planning perspective, and I'm sure you're going to touch on, hopefully, what Councillor Farley was alluding to as well, with the high-rise developments and things like that, and also what our current policy is, and the percentages, and also to ensure that as a council we're actually following that when we get these developments coming through. So, Tom, over to you.
Sure, thank you for having me. Obviously, I'd caveat that everything I'm about to say now applies to kind of new developments, so schemes, residential and non-residential, that are going to come forward in the borough. We obviously have housing targets for about just over 1,000 homes a year, as well as obviously a significant number of non-residential developments that come forward every year. That is obviously a fraction of the kind of 110,000-ish homes that already exist in the borough. So this is obviously an important stream, but just kind of one proportion, and obviously the kind of the retrofitting is dealing with a lot of the kind of the existing homes that we've been talking about so far. Obviously, in Hillingdon, the way we kind of insist on electric vehicle charging points in new development comes through the planning system. Obviously, all new development that requires planning permission has to go past our development plan. The development plan being essentially two documents, the local plan, which is written by the council, and the London plan, which is written by the mayor, but obviously consulted on by all the London boroughs. Both sets of documents contain policies on electric vehicle charging points, but the London plan is the latest. So legally speaking, it carries its standards carry the most weight in terms of what we request, and indeed they are because it is the latest document, they are the strongest policies in terms of securing the most electric vehicle charging points on residential and non-residential schemes. There's obviously, the standards differ slightly depending on what the use of the development is. So there's different standards, whether it's residential or it's a school or it's a hotel. The most common one that councillors may be aware of who sit on planning committee or watch the planning committee will be the requirement for 20% active and 80%, i.e. the remainder, to be passive charging points. The difference between active and passive being that an active charging point is a charging point that's built in and ready to use once the development's finished. A passive space is essentially one that comes with a power supply and the cabling required to retrofit it at a later date, to kind of prevent you from digging up the whole car park, so to speak, in the future. So they are secured via condition on applications. So the developer will come in. We will. The policy is clear. It's publicly available when you submit your application. But if you submitted an application without electric vehicle charging points, you would work with Dr. Tilley and his team to ensure that you could then meet the standard. That is conditioned and then secured when the decision's made. That is the current position. Some of you also may be aware that there is currently a private members' bill going through Parliament that it's having its second reading this week, I believe, and that is discussing moving it to building regulations, essentially, so different system to planning. So obviously, in the planning system at the moment, it's very much up for either the elected mayor or the local authority to dictate what the standard is. That has obviously been successful for some boroughs, but less successful for others. The government have picked this up and are now proposing that there is a standard blanket standard across England that could potentially be built into the building regulation system, so that when you build the development and when you seek sign-off from your building control inspector, you would have to demonstrate a standard of 1 in 5 spaces are active spaces. So that is the proposal that's going through that's having its second reading this week. If anyone's kind of unsure about where this 20% figure comes from, it's thrown around a lot. I believe it's the National Infrastructure Commission's recommendation up to 2025. So that's why it's kind of 1 in 5, 20% seems to be the number that they've settled on for the time being. Obviously, that's scope to change. So generally speaking, that's kind of where we may be going, and then kind of a brief summary of where we're at the moment. I know everyone will be keen to talk about kind of enforcement and how we insist that these take place. There are essentially kind of 2 mechanisms for ensuring that they are delivered. One is the kind of the standard planning enforcement procedure. So in the same way that you would make sure a building is built in the same way, or you would stop an outbuilding, it requires on either a kind of a case officer spotting an error in an application that they've approved, or a local resident coming forward and saying, this is a new development, why hasn't it got electric vehicle charging points, and then reporting that to the council. Obviously, this is an issue that's conditioned as part of application, so by definition it's enforceable, and it's something that the council could take enforcement action against. Typically, it would be more of an approach rather than an initial enforcement action to the developer to understand what's happened and make the request to correct the error. And then obviously, if that wasn't followed up, strictly speaking, you could take enforcement action through the planning system. There was a kind of a second mechanism, which is that Transport for London provided funding to an organisation called Westrans, who did travel plan monitoring. A travel plan is essentially a collection of measures, so to speak, that comes with a new development to ensure that it includes sustainable travel. So electric vehicle charge points would have been included as one of those. So TfL were providing funding to Westrans to have a travel plan monitoring officer for West London. Obviously, TfL have had funding issues due to COVID of late, So my understanding is that's not in place at present, but it's hopefully something that would be restored when the funding's restored. So those are the two mechanisms, much like most planning issues in planning enforcement. There are no there's no spot check, so to speak. There's no dedicated officer going out looking for this particular issue, but it's one that's captured just through the normal planning enforcement regime. I would note that for kind of non-residential providers in particular, it is almost in their interest to provide these spaces. We've already kind of heard tonight that people are keen to go and charge their cars in these spaces. So if your supermarket has a charging point, you may go charge it at that supermarket, and then obviously the supermarket benefits from any business while you're charging your car, but also they can seek a percentage of the profits from the company offering the charging points. If you look at ZapMap, which is obviously the map that Alan mentioned earlier, lots of the hotels, including the new ones in Hillingdon, have electric vehicle charging points because it's almost a necessity. If you're not providing them, then you're ruling an entire segment of the demographic out, so to speak, those who own electric cars. So there is obviously an interest from the non-residential providers in particular to install these things. But yes, if anyone did note that there was a new development that should but does not have electric vehicle charging points, that is an enforceable planning matter.
Thank you, Adam. A couple of points come out of that for me. First one, we know it's enforceable, and obviously in my previous role I knew it's enforceable. How often have we actually taken enforcement action against any developer over this? Say in the past 2 years, 3 years.
So obviously I'm slightly speaking on behalf of a different team. Anecdotally speaking, I think Alan and I obviously had a conversation before this, and we weren't aware of any that had kind of gone straight all the way through to planning enforcement, so to speak, so would have been formally registered in that way. So we haven't had any issues that have kind of gone to a formal planning inspectorate to say they have not put in electric vehicle charging points. That I'm aware of. Obviously, there may have been something that slipped my notice, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not a matter that we've ever kind of taken formally to planning appeal.
Okay, and obviously it's a condition, and we know it's a condition. We know that it's top of the government's agenda, top of agendas of every government across the world at the moment, the environment. And so we put the condition on, our planning teams do that, our committees, our chairman put these conditions on. Yet we're reliant as an authority on members of the public knowing what our planning policies are to say to us that development haven't put any electric charging points in. Surely, and this could be another recommendation, Steve, we should be more proactive, knowing when we put these conditions on, that we do ensure that they're put in, because if we don't find out, say, for 18 months, 2 years after the development's been open, we're going to look stupid. Because obviously this is no attack on planning or whatever, but we do need to become proactive, because environmental issues are the top of everybody's agenda. We know that across the world. And there's going to be the big conference in the UK very shortly. So I think we should be looking seriously at whether or not that goes as one of the suggestions to Cabinet, that we become more proactive in that area. Because otherwise we're reliant on members of the public knowing what London Borough of Hillingdon's planning policies are when it comes to making an enforcement action against a developer. So, and especially if the planning committees have done their job. I'm sure they don't want to be sitting back thinking, oh, well, we've conditioned that, that'll be fine. Then they find 2 or 3 years later, somebody comes up to them and says, you know that development? So that could be something going forward, I think. before I come back, Adam?
All I'd say is that just in terms of we can, so that policy is relatively newish. Electric vehicle charging points has been built into the policy since about 2016. So you're correct in saying that schemes that we began conditioning in 2016-17 will be coming online in terms of they'll actually be built within the coming years. So that is something that we can track, so to speak. We can monitor schemes where they were decided at a certain time period. We have those maps. We track when they're completed. So it is something that you could map and target with relative ease.
Yeah, we may make it part of our report. Any other questions for Tom? Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tom. I'm still going back on the point I was raised before was about the existing developments and large tower blocks and so on. I just wanted to sort of delve into that a bit more. But also the reference you made about the 80%, the passive ones are the 80%. So this to retrofit or whatever at a later stage. I'm assuming that they are sort of future-proofed. So the developments, as we know, the technology moves on. I'm assuming that the sort of the interconnectors to the grid remain the same, regardless of what the device is, I suppose you could call it, that sits on the surface that plugs into the car. Is that the case?
So I mean, by passive, they very much simply mean that the cabling and the power, so those two components, are within reach of the spaces in the car park. So you're not building essentially a car parking space that is fundamentally detached from the electricity grid. It doesn't really extend beyond that, so to speak. So there's no kind of very specific details about what qualifies as passive or not. What types of electricity it has to be. It is very it's generic. From my understanding, that is obviously sufficient for it to be retrofitted at a later date. It doesn't need to be a specialist type of cabling that's put under there. It's something we can look into to confirm. But yes, the requirement for it to be passive is simply the definition is simply to have the cables and the power put under the spaces. Yeah,
it was just more in the context of when you were saying it's there, so you didn't dig up a car park again, or sort of dig up the ground and reinstall something else. It was just to make sure that it was suitable for development as technology moves on, that they would be compatible, basically. I think is where I was going with it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there would need to be an element of construction. Obviously, even if the cables are there, they're going to get overlaid for a period of time,
right? And
they have to be re-reached. It's more not that you're not digging up the entire car park while residents are living there, so to speak, and saying no, we've got to relay the entire car park, and you have no access to your car for a period of time.
But so it was more that the power was fine. And then so just go back to the existing developments. How are we being proactive or working with those developers to look at where we can, on their land, I guess, install those devices as they come through? Thank you.
I think Dr. Tilley's going to answer this one.
Yeah, if I can answer that question. You mentioned previously existing tower blocks with a car park used by the residents. Now, the government have made available a grant funding called ORCS, On-Street Residential Charging, and that grant is available to provide typically electric vehicle charging point in lamp columns or standalone units along residential streets. Now, we've confirmed that that funding can also be used to provide electric vehicle charging points in car parks such as those at the base of tower blocks. Now, in the invitation to tender, we are expecting the tenderers to be aware of the various grants, and we would be expecting them to again, it's what they come back to us with. It appears that it's a priority or a matter of interest for yourself, so we'll be looking to see how many of the tenderers come back with proposals to provide electric vehicle charging points in car parks situated at the bottom of blocks of flats. We are aware of these grants, and we're also asking those questions to the tenderers. Are you aware of the grants? And as I mentioned earlier, we would expect the tenderer to make all the relevant grant applications under our control, of course, and our final signature. So, yeah, the AUX funding is 75% contribution towards the cost of providing electric vehicle charging points, on-street residential charging points, AUX funding.
There's a lot going to come out of this tender. Thank you. Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I just want to thank Tom for his update. And to echo the sentiment there, as someone who sat on many a major planning committee, I can assure members around the table and anybody watching on YouTube that there is an awful lot of scrutiny that goes in, particularly major developments, ensuring that their percentages are met. That's scrutinised by members of the committee, but also by officers as well. But I do take the point about follow-up further down the line. My question is in relation to something that Alan mentioned earlier on, which is the stage 3 or phase 3 or strand 3, I think it was, which is going to be looking at potentially planning applications for supercharging sites, which I don't think we've got any yet because they would have come forward, but I'm sure that there are people out there starting to put plans together for supercharging sites, which will charge vehicles in half an hour, 40 minutes, that you've got on service stations at the moment. Is our policies, and I'm sure the London plan and our own local plan, have they got suitable provision that also protects things like green belt as well, and the like for these, I'm sure, supercharging sites, which is going to come our way at some point in the not too distant future. My other question is slightly less of an issue, but certainly with our drop curb policy, which changed a little while back, we might want to look at revisiting some of the dimensions which are included in that, because we're starting to see more and more residents say, you know, I want to buy an electric car, I want to do a drop curb, but it's slightly smaller than the current policy allows for. So again, don't want to cause any sort of issues, you know, cars parking over pavements or anything, but certainly we might want to be looking just to review that, which will help people, you know, provide the suitable charging arrangements for themselves on a drop curb. So those are my 2 points.
Do you want to answer either Alan or Tom regarding the policy referred to about the green belts, protect green belts, etc., and suitable provision?
So obviously the green belt remains protected both nationally, regionally and locally, and obviously as you'll be aware, it's a very, very strong test that you'd have to pass, and obviously every application would be treated on its merits, but there is significant policy affording protection for green belt. There are policies with general support for electric vehicle charging points, and obviously that would be a material factor in any application that came forward. Generally speaking, it would have to be assessed on its merits, the application. But yes, obviously green belts very big priority, and obviously the best way to protect the green belt would be to kind of find brownfield sites where these kind of supercharging sites could take place.
So I think, just paraphrasing, I think what we're saying is our existing policies, the London plan and local plan, will be enough to cover any future applications for supercharging sites.
That is correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Any further questions? Oh, you're going to ask us a question, Dr. Tilly. No. Dr.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that's a very good point about drop curbs. I'll definitely mention that with colleagues. With regards to rapid electric vehicle charging hubs, I probably have the same idea as perhaps you are thinking of, you know, a big glass shiny building with the usual suspects, Subway and Greggs and all that sort of thing for you to go in and have a coffee while your electric vehicle's being charged. But they're not actually like that. A rapid electric vehicle charging hub could just be 6 car parking spaces with an electric vehicle charging point, obviously, and they would generally need a new substation, but I gather it's not an enormous thing. And we're speaking to Transport for London. They've got 3 sites in mind. We've discussed the first, and we're having a second meeting to discuss the other 2 sites. One's Stockley Road area, the other one's Eastcote. The first I'll mention was Friesland Way, but there's issues there with the Master Brewer site development. Another discussion is the land holdings the council has. The GLA anticipate providing 1,000 rapid electric vehicle charging hubs on their own land. And so the council, I'm not a property surveyor, but it strikes me from my work so far, the council's sitting on a big asset, all of the land it owns, and all of those people out there wishing to build it, what in effect are petrol stations, you know, electric vehicle charging hubs. So they're exciting times, if I can put it like that.
Definitely. Councillor Farley, you had a further question?
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point of clarity for my own understanding. So we've got this distinction between the types. Like when you have an electrical device and you charge it or you partly charge it, it sort of diminishes the battery and these sorts of things. When you do a rapid charge, is that the same as doing it over a longer period? I'm just trying to see if there's like an adverse reaction sort of thing when you do it on your rapid charge systems, or they're basically just there's no effect. They're just the same. It doesn't matter how if you do it charge. You stick it in for 30 minutes, whatever. It charges it to full whack, and you can drive it 200 miles on it. Or if you get what I'm getting at, it's that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As I understand, it's only the later vehicles that will accept rapid charging, not all. But people have said to me, well, shouldn't we be going for 100% rapid electric vehicle charging? Well, hasn't emerged yet, but there will be a second-hand market in electric vehicles, and there will still be a demand for electric vehicle charging points that are of a lower specification, because you might have an old electric vehicle, but you can't charge it anywhere because everything's top of the range, ready to charge Teslas. You know, like, so you plug your car and it will pop something. Right. But no, there's still a place for the lower spec electric vehicle charging points as the second-hand car market matures.
Thank you.
It'll certainly be interesting, I think, when the second-hand car market becomes the second-hand electric vehicle car market. Be like going to buy some dead batteries from someone, wouldn't it, I think? But we'll see. Any other questions for the 2 officers? No? I'd like to thank you both for attending this evening, Tom and Alan. Thank you very much. Your input's been most welcome, and certainly bringing us up to speed on some of the things that are happening now. I think from our discussions this evening, I've certainly got 3 recommendations written down, which I'll discuss with Steve at some point, see if there's merit in taking those forward. But thank you once again for coming to our committee, and maybe we'll see you when we present to Cabinet. But thank you very much. Okay, can I just draw everybody's attention to the public safety, the scoping report, because on page 17 it gave meeting dates, but obviously, Steve, that's slightly different now because we haven't had the cabinet member attend yet, etc., etc. So we're just bringing this up to date for the next round.
Yeah. So the scoping report is fairly stagnant. It stays as it was at the start.
Yeah.
But it's a fairly liquid document as well. So I guess we can update it to ensure, because we have a cabinet member coming to our November meeting.
Yeah, that's right.
So we can outline the changes that have happened to each witness session.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to the highlight of the evening, we've got this down as, on the order paper I've got in front of me, we missed out agenda item 6. We went 5, 7, 9 and 10. So, we will pick up now agenda item 6, which is the service overview, antisocial behaviour and enforcement team. And welcome, of course, Dan Kennedy, the Corporate Director for Planning, Environment, Education, Community Services. Good to see you again, Dan. Been a while, but it's very good to see you. And thank you for coming to our committee. I'll hand straight over to you because I can see we've got it on the screens and we have got the slide pack in front of us. Steve, can I mention once again, though, please can we have these more than the day before the meeting? There are deadlines for reports to be produced, so can we see that these, if there's going to be any of these are produced in line with the agenda going out, please. Over to you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And how do you follow that on EV? That was very good. Okay, so I'm Dan Kennedy. I'm going to give you an overview of the antisocial behaviour service. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to answer all of your questions in this presentation. It wasn't my intention to sort of stuff lots of facts and figures in there. So I'm going to give you an overview, and I'm more than happy to take questions. If there are some facts and figures that the committee need, more than happy to provide a report to follow that up. Okay, so if I give you the overview. So in terms of the scope of the team and the service we've got, I mean, they deal with a whole broad spectrum of issues. Many are sort of low-level nuisance issues, but they can lead right up to serious harassment, and obviously that causes distress to our residents. It can damage the quality of life and interfere very much with the ability of our residents to enjoy the peace and quiet of their home, their environment, and just community, really. And so I think that's an important point is that where people live day in, day out, when you see something, when you experience something, when you hear it, that really causes a lot of upset. And that's why, we have this team. That's why we do receive, and I'll tell you about that in a moment, a high number of inquiries to this service each month. So the sorts of issues that they deal with, the team, broadly speaking, sort of three main issues. There are others. Noise, that obviously, as you can imagine, includes music from domestic properties, can include nightclubs, commercial noise as well. Businesses operating out of hours, but it could also include some significant seasonal activity, parties during the summer months, barbecues running into the early hours of the morning, that sort of thing. But dogs barking as well, all hours. Intimidation, harassment and violence as well. Fortunately, we see less of that. But a big one that we do experience in terms of volume is what we can loosely describe as environmental sort of activities. Typically sort of waste deposited, includes abandoned vehicles as well, overgrown gardens, increasingly dealing with those, and that leads to as well, and harbours rats and pests and other vermins as well, which we end up dealing with. So we've got a team to deal with that, broken down into case officers who tend to do the investigative work, tends to be ongoing type casework. We've got rapid response officers. They tend to deal with, as the name suggests, something that comes up. They deal with it quite quickly. It's addressed quite quickly. And then the out-of-hours officers who work a rota from Thursday night right through to sort of Monday morning, Sunday night, who mainly deal with noise nuisance, but they also undertake what I call visible patrols as well, where we've got hotspot areas just to displace, and we coordinate any patrols with the police and other partners as well. So in terms of sort of demand and activity, I've summarised just on one slide here, but I thought it illustrated it quite well actually, that we see typically, it's fairly stable actually, we see about 1,000, we receive about 1,000 service request inquiries a month. It does spike in the summer months, seasonal activity, particularly noise, and we receive typically about 100 members' inquiries a month. About a quarter of those inquiries are to do with waste, deposited litter, black bags deposited, usually low-level stuff. The priority, to be frank, is just to clear it because there isn't really any evidence that we can follow up on, I'm afraid. We've run, various exercises looking for names, addresses, and where we do find those, we will of course prosecute and take those seriously. But what we found is the amount of effort and energy just trying to sift through waste, just trying to find something, you may as well just accept the fact we just need to clear that black bag and get it done, and focus our efforts on bigger ticket items. Noise issues, as you can see on the slide there, almost a quarter of all activity is to deal with noise. Again, that can be very difficult to bring a satisfactory conclusion and resolution to. I mean, where we receive inquiries from residents, which tends to be sort of one-off noise, like a family barbecue or party, there's little that we can do. We can remind residents to be respectful and finish early, but usually that's a one-off, and there isn't a reason to go back. And we usually just write to or remind the resident, look, just don't do it, finish early, let people know. If you're going to be holding a party or family gathering, then be respectful. Where it's persistent noise, then of course we do take action. We investigate, issue notices, etc. Vehicle-related incidents, about 15% of inquiries tends to be abandoned vehicles primarily, where we take action and we remove them if we need to. Most inquiries come through the contact centre or self-service, pretty much split equally on those actually. So it's good that we are seeing an increase in self-service activity as well. So just a few examples. I didn't want to overwhelm you with these, and I can more than happy to provide more examples of this. But a couple of examples there of flight tipping. One particular case stood out for me, and it was a really persistent, long-standing criminal fly tipping, very large amounts of waste. And it was across 2 boroughs, but working successfully together, we managed to pool our efforts, pool our resources, and collect evidence, which meant that the individual, very unusually, when it came to court, pleaded guilty. And because the evidence was so strong, their legal representative advised them to plead guilty because the sentencing would have been much stronger. So that was a very good outcome, and it was just persistent, large-scale fly tipping, real nuisance for our residents. With the huge investment we've made as a borough, really excellent facilities we have around CCTV over the last 2 to 3 years, with some state-of-the-art technology, we now have much better evidence of images that we can circulate, and so we are now circulating that on social media for identification purposes. And that's led to 6 offenders, which has resulted in a fixed penalty notice being issued. It makes people think twice, quite frankly. I mean, unfortunately, we do have not necessarily residents, but we do have offenders who will clearly hunt out spots where we haven't got CCTV, because it's obviously very challenging to have CCTV everywhere, and they will persistently fly tip in those spots. But we do have capability to put in place what we call mobile or movable cameras, and that has been successful deterrent primarily. A good example I just wanted to highlight as well, and this is the important, I'll come on to this in a moment, where we're actually trying a very different approach, where we are sharing information about persistent nuisance ASB, and using, I suppose, in our armoury all of the resources we have. And so this is one example at the bottom of the slide there, is about a nightclub with persistent nuisance noise to residents, real nuisance. I mean, if you're being woken up by noise at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, Sunday morning, and if you're working, it is just horrendous. So, and we have, so instead of, I could have sent in the ASBIT team and say, look, please don't do it again, here's a letter, or I send in the licensing team, or I send them in together, and then we start looking at other things. That tends to make businesses more alert to what we're doing. So I think it's about what gets leverage, and I think that for me has been important. And I've used the licensing team to pay a call on a few occasions, and issues have stopped very quickly. And so I think it is, and that's important as well to draw on that sort of whole council approach. So we'll talk a bit more about it, but I'm drawing on the resources, the expertise from other teams. It's who has the biggest impact. Another example is one restaurant in the north of the borough where we had delivery drivers, real persistent issue, Again, I could have sent it in the ASBIT team, sent in licensing and community safety. Restaurant owner, absolute credit to them. It was a franchise, fully on board, and we gave the delivery drivers a space to park out the back. They're obviously keen to get to the first orders to get their business, but the restaurant owner, absolute credit to them, said we are not going to serve any delivery drivers who do not park in the designated place will not get business from me. And so again, that cooperation, that understanding, just approaching it in a very different way, rather than issuing a letter and a fine and saying don't do it again. Let's explain things to businesses. They're very cooperative. They want to work with us, and so they also want to have repeat business from our residents' customers. And so I've touched on it in terms of a new approach that we're taking. Now, under me now are most of the enforcement teams in the council. So it means then that we're able to pool and share some of the intelligence. So I've been working since I've taken over these areas since January. I've been applying a very different approach. So we want to focus very much, move away from enforcement as being the first approach to prevention. What can we do from the intelligence we've got around preventing issues before they even come up? So I've got information on intelligence, hotspot areas, but actually I'll also look at some of the seasonal patterns. So we know noise in particular. You saw the graph in the previous couple of slides around the spike in summer activities, which tends to be noise. Well, actually we can start to, as we approach summer, we can start to issue reminders to people, work with businesses. Last year we had this problem. I hope we're not going to see it again. Let's work together so that we don't get a recurrence. Early intervention as well, so nipping things in the bud in everyday language, getting out early, having that conversation, and being tough where we need to get the right result on behalf of our residents. And we will take enforcement action where we absolutely need to. And rehabilitation, that might seem quite a strange word or term to include, but that's about where you know you're going to have repeat offenders. Just keeping in touch with them, just saying, I hope everything's okay. Hope you're abiding by what we agreed to. It usually just keeps things quite settled. So we're applying a very different approach, and it isn't just ASB, it's actually across all the teams, but it's also joining up the dots, which I'll explain in a bit more on the next slide. But we, importantly, data and intelligence driven, mapping those hotspot areas, building up a picture. We've also moved to what I'd call a ward-based or a patch-based model. So whereas previously when I inherited the service, we had ASB officers working all over different parts of the borough. So they, one job they can be in Northwood, the next job they can be in Hayes. They weren't getting to know their areas and building up the relationship with the ward councillors. So we've moved since August. We've moved to a sort of named officer or geographical patch-based, and we're the sort of where we're starting with this model is that we're working on the hotspot or high volume areas. And so there's wards which we're seeing a higher volume of issues or service requests. So we're targeting those and working with, and we're about to launch an approach where we're working with ward councillors to really get to the nuisance issues. And I suppose it's a brokered conversation that we're looking to have. We can't fix everything, but give me your top 10 issues, and I will promise you we'll get them sorted for you. So we're applying a very different approach, so that the issues that really are a nuisance to residents and ward councillors, let's do what we can to get them fixed, so that because otherwise they're just the gift that keeps on giving. And we've got to move away from just treating issues and saying, dear resident, don't do it again. Next month, dear resident, don't do it again. Next month, dear resident, don't do it again. To actually, right, let's sort this out. Let's apply a different approach. Why are there issues? Are there mental health issues in this household? Are there other issues in this household? Does the resident really understand, or the business really understand the impact they're having? And explaining things in a way that if this doesn't stop or reach an acceptable level, we will take enforcement action, and we're serious about it. So, I mean, that's worked successfully. So if I just sort of move on to some sort of different approaches in terms of priorities. So I mentioned prevention, so we've got dedicated ASBIT officers for each ward, but we're actually now rolling out targeted problem-solving days. Now, we are working with a whole range of council departments to do this. So we're working with the education services, who are targeting families where their children, may not be in school, who may be seen to be on the streets. We are working with waste services, who are then doing waste checks on commercial businesses, because there are businesses, I'm afraid, who don't have waste licences and who just dump things on the high street or in the alleyways behind the businesses. That's a nuisance. That's a home for rat infestation and other issues, particularly if it's food waste. So, everyday speak, blitzing an area, being highly visible, speaking to residents, speaking to business, working with the police as well, working with licensing. We're going around to businesses in a patch in an area, and we're making ourselves known, and what we're working on, and it's just coming back out of the shadows. Fortunately now, the sort of community payback programs as well. Again, residents are really in favour of those programs, and again, we're linking them to cleaning up alleys, cutting back vegetation which can harbour litter and fly tipping, and sort of really hitting the borough. And so we're working. And so our process is that we're working around different parts of the borough. We were in Harefield and Ickenham last Friday. Next month we're in the south of the borough, and we're working with teams to plan these events and get them rolled out. And importantly, though, is that we're not just going into an area. We're picking up on issues, and we're keeping a tracking list of issues in that ward. And my teams are saying we're not going to stop monitoring these until they're all ticked off and done. And then we're learning from the issues from that. Well, what can we do next time to prevent some of these issues where they're a real nuisance? Target hotspots in the borough as well. So I know, and I shouldn't know this, but I do, where are we seeing what I would describe as congregations or problems around those little kind of nitrous oxide canisters? And I know, again, I shouldn't know this, but I do know where all those little hideaways in parks are. And so we're organising ASB patrols to say, well, actually, you shouldn't be here. And working with Councillor Riley, we're about to progress a campaign on this very issue, raising awareness about the dangers of nitrous oxide. So we're hitting it from actually a public health point of view, and actually, you shouldn't be doing this, but we're also displacing and deterring. And so we're joining up the dots with our public health colleagues on that as well. So importantly, though, we're working with the police to share intelligence and organise ourselves so that we're making best use of the resources and hitting those real nuisance issues. I touched on sort of nuisance or long-standing cases. We've got about 30 cases which really are long-standing nuisance cases, and they're not easy to fix. So I know of one where really long-standing business operation. Now, they have permitted development rights to operate 24/7 if they want to. Now, I can't, without really strong evidence that there is a statutory noise or dust or some other threshold that's been met, I can't get our borough solicitor to send a horrible letter to them to say, do stop it now, or we're going to take action, because I've got to have that evidence. So, in terms of the sort of planning of it, I know it's a real nuisance living this particular site. So we've approached it that, well, actually, let's negotiate. What's going to be acceptable? Let's try and get things down. So we've limited the hours of operation to still later than I would like, but we've reduced it from being 24/7 to actually certain hours of the night. There isn't, they've got agreement, no operation, and we're looking at other mitigation measures to put in place, such as restrictions on lights. And in this particular operation, there has been a concern around dust, so the operator has voluntarily put in place a dust suppression system. So what we've found is, if you explain things to businesses and don't go in hard first, but be clear that if you don't see some improvement, we will follow up, you often find you get a quicker response and cooperation. It isn't always everything that our residents want, but we're making progress. We've got about 30 of these cases. Some of them are long-standing, some of them are neighbour nuisance. The important thing is on the approach we're taking with these cases is, I've introduced a different approach that we have one lead officer for this particular case. They coordinate across all of the teams, and importantly, what we do get to see is a difference in the work that we're doing. And just to give you an example, on a particular case, it was a garage operating, repairing cars on the street, and operating 7 days a week. Now we went to see the garage, so this cuts across ASBIT, licensing, I gave the lead to licensing because they're going to have a bigger impact, but we also linked up with ASBIT, who also helped out with enforcement notices and everything else. We spoke to the residents. We said, look, we've reached a point, unless you are prepared to write a witness statement, we've reached a point we can't take any further action. We got the business to a point that they agreed not to do X, Y, Z. And actually we organised a bit of a clean-up in the area. Residents were delighted. They accepted that we've done as much as we can, rather than one team doing that, another team doing that, another team doing that, and it not necessarily being coordinated. You've got 3 people speaking to the same resident, and having one officer to coordinate and speak to one person being accountable and knowing that they can operate with authority on that case has made a difference. We haven't cracked them all yet. We're still working our way through them. I've made promises to the leader and Councillor Riley, but we're on it, and it's a different approach. But we are starting to see residents going, yeah, good. And we also organised a little bit of one of Perry's street sweepers to clean up. They were delighted. So it's actually listening to residents what you want, but also sometimes brokering a deal. We can't do everything, but we will try it. We would do our very best to do that. Residents feel listened to. They feel that you're actually making a difference. And I think the third point on the slide there is about raising awareness and engagement. We need to raise more awareness about what we're doing with residents, councillors and partners. And we are, with Cabinet, planning to roll out some community engagement events with businesses, with the police, showcasing a bit of what we're doing, telling residents what we are doing around community safety and ASB, but importantly as well, engaging with ward councillors, trying to, again, broker a deal. What can we do? What can't we do? Work with us to identify the nuisance issues, and we will promise you that we will focus on those. But, you know, in many respects, whilst, for example, an overhanging branch will be a bit of a nuisance, we've got to prioritise our time on the really, really nuisance issues and get them resolved. And then finally, which will really make a difference, because it will allow me to, with my performance background, to be able to just press a button and I can see how many cases each officer has got, how long they've had them, and importantly, have a really strong case review model in place. So for example, if Dan Kennedy's got 5 cases, my manager will be saying, well, actually, one of them you should have closed down by now. Where are we at? Or it's coming up to close down. And then there is a really strong performance management model, but also as well, I can quickly plot all of that, and I can tell you, well, actually, we've got an increase in ASB in that ward this week. What's going on? Let's get out there and let's get out speaking to the ward councillors. Let's get some high visibility. Let's kind of just dampen things down before I'm telling this committee, oh, we've had an increase of X% in at the end of Q1, when actually it might have only been 10% because we'd seen the intel to get in early. So that's a very quick run through. I'm sure you've got loads of questions, and I haven't covered everything. I know I haven't covered some of the tools that we've got, like PSPOs, etc. But I'm all yours.
Thank you, Dan. One question I just want to ask before I open up. I've got Councillor Morgan, Councillor Barnes, Councillor Farley. Where you said from August 2021 named officers dedicated geographical areas and wards, we were discussing this prior to our meeting, and it was news to all of us. Yep. So why wasn't that communicated, if this has been on since August, to ward councillors in relevant wards, and who that point of contact actually is?
In all honesty, we've introduced it on a phased basis. So we've moved from our previous model to the new model, and what is about to start is a series of meetings with ward councillors and a cabinet member where we are running through the new model and the ways of working. And those, Councillor Riley's keen for them to take place November into December with all ward councillors, an invitation to meet with me and Councillor Riley. And we will go through pretty much what we've just covered here, and it will explain the new approach. What we wanted to do, if I'm being completely candid, is just introduce it in a workable, phased way. But I take on board the point, but you should have a consistent response from the same officer to inquiries. I know things aren't quite perfect yet, but by owning their patch, they get to know their patch, they get to know the issues, and we can build up that relationship, that really strong relationship working with ward councillors.
Thanks, Dan. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, but I think Councillor Barnes was just ahead of me.
Another gentleman giving away to Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Dan. That was so informative. Thank you. I just got a couple of very quick questions. I just wanted to ask you your knowledge on what sort of, do we get many harassment inquiries about CCTV on private properties amongst residents to each other when they're saying it's pointing in my garden or it's pointing at my front door and that kind of thing? And the second question is, what's the provisions put in place for the next season, which is the fireworks from next month?
So, thank you. So we've got, we don't get that many inquiries about CCTV. I think it's actually become just more accepted these days. You think about the Ring doorbells, but we work with Neighbourhood Watch, who run an OWL and a CCTV system. It's, very, very active they are, and they provide residents with advice about, camera positioning. But generally speaking, in the deterrent and detection of crime, it's not, we don't get many complaints. Occasionally we do, but when we do check to make sure that those cameras are not pointing. They shouldn't be pointing into a lounge or a room of residents, for example. And we will advise the occupants if need be. But I have to say the cases where we have had such complaints, we found them not to be in breach of any guidelines, GDPR guidelines. That said, there has been a recent announcement on obviously the use of evidence from Ring doorbells. There was recently a case from these sort of CCTV doorbells where there's been some sort of recent case law. So that I know, for example, there's been some recently updated advice provided about the use of such CCTV. In terms of fireworks, we are entering that season of celebration. So the usual, we've got ASBIT officers on patrol throughout the 2-week period, taking action quickly. So there are very strict, very clear, lawful guidelines for the use and setting off of fireworks. It's obviously if those fireworks are operated outside those hours of operation, then we can take action. And it is just a campaign about being sensible, safe, working with the fire brigade, that we'll be running the usual sort of things that we run each year.
Thanks, Dan. I think generally I find New Year's Eve worse than firework night now. They are going till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning around my way. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got about a dozen questions, but I won't raise them all tonight. Thank you, Dan, for your presentation. It's great to see exactly what's happening and what's going on nowadays. But just 2 points I want to pick up. First one, you mentioned about the clearing of black bags that literally you're going to go along, pick them up and just sling them away sort of thing. Surely by doing that, we're getting down to the stage of where that resident that's dumping their rubbish bag out is getting a free daily refuse collection. If I'm speaking from experience here, and it's a case of I'm tempted to do the same. We just dump the bag out, providing it's household rubbish, there's no names. Nothing's going to happen. And the other thing that we want to talk about is foxes. We've talked about rats and such like. We're starting to see and get complaints from residents about foxes attacking their vehicles at night. They come out in the morning and there's puncture marks on the tyres where foxes bitten into them or chewed through the rubbers of the hoses underneath the car. And it's a case of what can be done. Thank you.
So on the sort of black bags or domestic waste, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a nuisance. I mean, you see a little bit on the high street and you see about 3 huge black bags dumped. I mean, anyone putting that there knows that's not the place where you put domestic waste. the speed of response, just to clear it, is our priority. But what we do with all of those jobs that get logged and collected, we plot them and we look for those hotspot areas, and then we target those hotspot areas. So it's not uncommon to have near blocks of flats where we know there's not sufficient facilities for storage of waste to see waste on the high street or outside. So in terms of those particular cases, we will contact each of the residents of the blocks of flats, just a gentle reminder, helpful reminder, we've noticed X, we've noticed Y, please, as a reminder, this is where you need to be leaving your waste, or you need to keep it inside your property until refuse collection day. So, but the priority is to clear it for obvious public health and visual reasons, but we do use that intel to take action. I know Perry's team are very active in that area, the waste team. In terms of foxes, you're absolutely right. We're not the only borough actually where we've had issues of foxes damaging vehicles. It is a very sensitive issue for obvious reasons, and there's been a lot of work looking into foxes because this issue, that very issue you raise, Councillor Bianco has brought that to my attention, the attention of the ASBIT team. We looked into that, and the sort of expert view is effective remedies are limited. And the reason I say that is because it's where foxes have been humanely captured and removed and relocated in other parts of the country, they've found that foxes, because they're territorial, they quickly move into the area. So other foxes move in, so it doesn't address the issue. And then they breed, and then you're quite quickly, within a year, you're pretty much back to square one. I do take your point though, we can't give up, we've got to find a solution, but it's perhaps not as straightforward as it first presents. And it is actually a new one on me, that foxes are damaging vehicles. Usually they tear open rubbish bags or get into something, but it's not, it's just a very unusual thing. But we're not, I've looked into this, and we're not the only borough who's experiencing this problem. So I think it's one that we probably need to do a bit more work on, but it's not an easy fix, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. So I was Councillor Tugwell to go first. Thank you. Just on that one, I'm aware of that, but actually it was rats, not foxes, because my mechanic, I've had that issue 3 times, where the cable's been chewed through, and I've been told it's rats, but then someone else did say foxes, and give me suggestions about pepper and dog urine and whatever to try and dissuade them. But anyway, that aside, thank you for the explanation on the named officers, because that was something that I picked up, and I'm glad that's been addressed. Thank you. I am aware that the internal audit didn't give a particularly good grading, basically, to the ASBET team. I do note that you've got the one which is part of the report about the new casework management system. I'm assuming that's part of that resolution. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit briefly about what has come out of that internal audit, and what resolutions have been reached, and what's in play. The community payback, I'm glad to hear is coming back. I have actually worked with them. I was out on the Oxford Road for a day with them, clearing up some mess, heavy mess that was behind one of the shops a few years back. So I know they do very good work. So I'm very pleased to hear that they're coming back. On the committee I was on last week, this topic of CCTV and convictions and fines was asked about then. I am aware that there's a legal issue that they have come up against with opening bags that was being done, can't be done now. It's a legal issue that they've got. I was wondering, in terms of with the 6 convictions, I'd like to know sort of what proportion that is of the overall number that 6 represents. But also, when you say you've identified them, is that something that's been identified because you've gone to, I don't know, police, or you've gone sort of like knocking door to door with neighbours? They go, oh, we know it's so and so from this address. So I'm just trying to get an understanding how you identified them and being able to issue those penalties, because I know, having provided evidence of a box or something that's got someone's name on it, it hasn't. The council has not been able to pursue that any further. Thank you.
So in terms of the internal audit, I mean, what I've set out tonight is very much the actions we're taking to bring about a step change in the ASBIT service, and it is, it's not rocket science. But it's actually about working with ward councillors. It's about working with residents. And I mean, I think when you look at those numbers, when you think actually 12,000 inquiries every single year, that's enormous. And so I think we've got to, in terms of sort of brokering that deal, but also perhaps shifting resources from responding all the time to actually, well, let's try and stop them in the first place. Let's move them upstream to prevention and early intervention. And this is part of a wider approach that we actually work with, say, Neighbourhood Watch, community groups, residents associations. So there is that community engagement and coordinating our efforts with the police. Now, I know just visible patrols with the police and ASBIT officers, I know this summer has led to significant reductions in ASB at the Lido. I know that for a fact. We've had patrol after patrol, night after night. I think I've had I'm going to attempt to faint now, and a fraction of the inquiries that we've had in previous years. But it's just visible patrols, and there's been cases where officers have just literally gone up to a small group of people and said, look, please don't be here, we're shut now. Okay. But when two burly individuals turn up, they don't tend to argue with them, they just respectfully actually leave. They're not necessarily bad people, they're just young people who are just listening to their music and just chatting with friends, but at 2 o'clock in the morning that sound carries. So I think in terms of that different approach, that's very much what is in line with the audit recommendations. We need to approach this very differently. We need a strong performance management, which the new system will give us, but we also need to be intelligence-led, and we need to be able to demonstrate that we're working to other procedures that we've got in place and to the timescales that we've got in place. Those tools give us the oversight, they give us the management oversight, and they allow us to draw on the evidence to really target hotspot areas and make a difference. In terms of CCTV evidence, you're right about the point about there's been some case law, we've taken advice from the Borough solicitor and his team. You've got to witness somebody dumping, and so if you find a black bag, there's no CCTV evidence, there's no one who can write a witness statement, you crack it open, well, how do you know somebody hasn't just planted it there? And we've had cases in the past where we've had, I don't know, a delivery label on a pit of cardboard's been floating down the street. Well, actually, has that just blown out of someone's recycling bag? Is it really an offence? So so I think we just got to apply a sort of, I would say, a common sense approach, and I think it's therefore about educating residents rather than perhaps trying to chase a ball that you'll never get in the back of the net. In terms of those particular cases, I would need to just check out the details of them, but I think the message though to committee is we now have more tools and evidence at our disposal. The challenge is that, I'm going to state the obvious now, aren't I? But we've got a clear image, but we don't know who they are. But somebody does. And if we've got images and I don't know if you've ever seen them, but there are sometimes literally two individuals who walk up with a mattress, dump it there, full view, facial expression, off they go, or a fridge or a freezer, whatever it is. They are clearly dumping something. Somebody knows who they are. Social media is helping us to crack down on this. So that evidence is it's irrefutable, and often people just pay the fines, and hopefully they never do it again.
Thanks, Dan. I can say, being an internal auditor for 10 years for the NHS prior to the job I do now in the NHS, internal audits do help bring change and improvements, as is happening now. So, yes, internal audits can kick you in the teeth sometimes, but that's what they're about. And there's clear evidence here that this is changing your department, your views, and your outlook on how to bring that back up. As I say, yes, I was one of those that came in and had to be careful as you were walking out after you told everybody, I'm really sorry, but your service isn't doing very well. But you can clearly see that you've got a lot of tools within your armoury now, and it is changing very quickly. Councillor Farley, if you have a very quick follow-up, because I've got other councillors.
Sorry, thank you. Just quickly, what you mentioned about the nitrous oxide. I was at a police war panel last week. I'm wondering what's happening with this approach now with this overall. What we're doing, we're working with like licensing teams to obviously. I know you can get them on the internet, but obviously there are shops that are selling them under the counter. I know that some of I'm aware that there have been instances where they've been recovered. I know some of the cases. So I'm wondering how that's sort of linking in with your approach. Thank you.
I suppose the key thing really for me is to try to. We can try to prevent this. Unfortunately, there are young people, individuals who take decisions to consume these. So I mean, one of the aspects I've been talking about with the education team and the community safety team is how can we take some of the education into schools and raise awareness. So that's an important aspect. That will be part of the campaign, and a sort of social media campaign as well. And those really, it's just that high visibility presence in the hotspot. They tend to be tucked away places where obviously whoever's consuming this won't be noticed. Usually it's more than one person. It's usually a sort of small group. But I think it's an education and where we can an enforcement approach against those who are selling these for improper use. But it's difficult to prove, particularly when it's freely available on the internet.
Thank you, Dan. Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief because I think Councillor Farley's covered off the point I wanted to make, which was really about to welcome back the community payback team. Is it going to be in the same format that we used to enjoy before, which is sort of groups of people helping to clear up certain areas, yeah?
Absolutely, and certainly when we come to talk to ward councillors, I want to know what your hotspots are, so I want to take as much of this resource as I can, because I think it's really valued actually by residents, and actually let's in a constructive way work with this group of people as part of the programme.
No, I really welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. Rats infestation. We've had problems. I was at a residents' meeting, and residents were complaining about rats actually entering their homes, and they had the doors open. There's a lot of building work going on in the area. Whether it's coming from there, where they've sort of disturbed a rat's nest, I don't know. But my question is, what can residents do? Can they contact the council? Will the council help, or do they have to sort of sort it out themselves? Thank you.
It's in terms of, I suppose, responding to sort of, I suppose, a high presence of rats. There's a different response, I'm afraid, depending upon your sort of tenure. So if you're a homeowner, then generally speaking, you often have to make those arrangements yourself. But for older people, residents, they can contact the council, and council tenants too. I think the wider issue, though, is the one you raise, which is that there are hotspots, places where rats can happily live their lives with and expands their population. Tends to be overgrown gardens, but they also need a food source. That's another important point. So restaurants, etc. So in fact, we are looking, our team, at running a bit of a blitz on rats in hotspot areas where we've had complaints and inquiries, and it's going to be a combination of things. Most likely it's going to be, we haven't quite worked out all the details yet, but again, an education campaign. So even small things like, well, actually you might have a compost bin, but don't put food waste out or peelings out, because that's a food source, particularly in the winter months. If you've got an apple tree, try and remove all of that waste very quickly. If there's windfall, because again, that's a food source. And importantly as well, I touched on it earlier, is a campaign around commercial waste premises, because obviously with food waste, that should be in a metal locked container, the lid comes down, and that rats can't actually get to that food waste. So we're looking at, it will be a targeted approach, but certainly joining up the dots with education, targeting overgrown gardens, and just sort of unkempt areas where rats could live, because they're quite happy to burrow into soil, pile. So they're very versatile creatures, and a sort of commercial business waste operation, sort of just visiting premises to make sure they've got all the necessary licenses, etc.
He came down one morning and one was on my grass, and mine is not proper grass, it's artificial turf, and it was dead on its back. And I thought I'll clear it when I come back. When I came back, a bird must have taken it away, so I lost the rat. Thank you.
That was handy. Natural waste. Recycling. Also, part of your education campaign should be, I know a lot of people do like to feed birds and they like to see birds in their garden, but the fat balls that they put out, and also the seeds. I remember many years ago, before my neighbour moved from next door to us, she come running into us one day and bashing on the door, so she was going to come through the door. She said, quick. And I was thinking, what's going on here? Ran me through her house. She said, look. And there were 2 rats gnawing away at the fat ball that she had hung out for the birds. And I said, well, that's why. I said, you get rid of that, they disappear. And lo and behold, what happened? She gets rid of that, and we didn't see him again. So, yeah, I know people do like feeding wild birds, but it has the downside as well. Councillor Farley, you had another question?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to sort of the process, if I may, and the sort of triaging process that you mentioned. Something that's a bit of a bugbear, I guess, is certainly under the old way of doing things, is you put in an ME, Members Inquiry, and you've got a 10-day turnaround. Day 10 comes along. Oh, we're looking into it, and so it's right at the end of the window. So how that's going to sort of be turned around, looking at that, and what the sort of a bit more on the triaging process, because you mentioned that you will look at the big things and so on.
Thank you. Now I've got to obviously agree what that any changes in triage with Cabinet, to make sure that we as officers are focusing on the important things for residents. But I suppose let me give you an example about how we probably need to just differentiate. So if not uncommon at this time of year, a resident might have a bonfire, and other residents write in and say that's terrible, make them stop. Actually, there's not. If it's just a Sunday afternoon and it's 2 hours, it's gone. There's not a lot you can actually do. You write to the resident. So actually, I can have somebody, if that sort of inquiry comes in, I don't need to allocate that as a case. Somebody can just say, send a letter out, we'll log it, we record it, so we can look for patterns, but actually I don't need an officer to investigate. High hedges is another one. There's very specific legislation around that. But in terms of process, when the new system goes live, we will have a dedicated manager who will be triaging all the cases on a sort of rotational basis and allocating them to case officers, but equally triaging out or to another officer who may be able to just take a different approach to respond. So that's important. Your point about speed of response is absolutely spot on. I want us to get to a point where there is, in terms of that initial triage and risk assessment, actually something that is, could be dangerous, or you can see that's a real nuisance. We need to get out much more quickly. So the plan is to resolve within 10 days. I want my officers to be coming back to ward councillors saying, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I've been out, contacted the resident. We're doing this. Resolved within 10 days. It's not always going to be possible, because sometimes to really reach a real permanent resolution, it's going to take maybe 20 days, 2 months sometimes. but keeping the ward council up to date is the important thing, and that will go on my long-standing cases list. So we don't lose sight of it. Others you can treat quite quickly, within 10 days or much sooner. But the culture's got to be quick response and keeping ward councillors up to date, delivering on our promises to residents.
That's part of your improvement and change as well, Dan. So, well done. Any other questions for Dan? Well, thank you, Dan, for attending this evening and giving us that oversight on ASBIT. It is something that obviously touches every single ward, and every single ward councillor is actually involved in at some point throughout their career as a councillor. And your team do work very hard for this borough, and they do a sterling job. And I know that, yes, internal audit have said what they've said, but as I said to you, that helps bring change and improvement. And just from your presentation tonight, we can have confidence that there is change and improvement coming through, most definitely. And we look forward to the other things coming online and being even more successful for us. Thank you, Dan, and take our thanks back to your team who do work very hard on behalf of this borough and its residents. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, which is the forward plan. I'm not going to read them all out because you've all had the report prior to this meeting. So if anybody's got any comments, can you make them now regarding Steve?
Just one thing to note, a new forward plan was published since our agenda was published for tonight. Only one new item went on, which is the one Alan mentioned earlier about the electric vehicle charge points, contract and infrastructure. So that was covered off earlier, but you know that's coming to Cabinet in January.
Thank you, Steve. Apart from that, anybody got any comments on what's on the forward plan? No, so the recommendation is that the Public Safety and Transport Select Committee notes and comments on items going to Cabinet if required. So is that noted? Thank you. Then we move on to agenda item 8, which is the Public Safety and Transport Select Committee work programme. Well, we've had this evening's meeting. Our next meeting is the 17th of November in Committee Room 6. And then January, February, March and April, Committee Room 5. Steve, going forward, please can we ensure that if we're going to have presentations, we do get them before the committee, and I don't mean just one day before the committee, ideally when the actual agenda is sent out, published and sent out to us. So looking at our work programme, if we have a look in November, we have witness session again, and we have the Cabinet Forward Plan monthly monitoring. The witness session, I believe, is going to be obviously take longer, hence why we don't have any other reports coming forward there. December there's no meeting because there is that little factor in there that's called Christmas, and I'm sure everybody's already done their Christmas shopping and finished. I'd like to think I had, but there you go. And then moving to January, that's when we start to look at our findings and conclusions. And we also have the budget proposals for the new financial year coming in January, and also the forward plan as usual. So that's going to be quite an exciting meeting because that's when we start putting together what we are going to send to Cabinet from this committee. Then in our February committee, that's where we approve what we are going to send, and we will have the forward plan again. And then we get the road and footway resurfacing service monitoring coming to us. Then in March is where our report does end up with Cabinet. I think from this evening we have had a very good session based on what officers have provided to us, and also especially our Hillingdon resident. I think we have got some things to go within, or certainly discuss some things that can go within this report to go to Cabinet. And then we have the forward plan, the as-bit fines and prosecutions, and the parking enforcement, abandoned cars, service reviews. And then in April, we just have the forward plan, because then, obviously, after the April meeting, there is certain thing that is happening across the borough in May. So that's where we're at. So do we agree that plan as it stands, or are there any amendments anybody wishes to suggest? No? So we agreed. Agreed? Okay, thank you. And I close the meeting at 9:35. And once again, thank you, officers, for attending. And take our thanks back to your teams, all of you, because all of you do a great job for our residents through planning, Alan through the highways and everything else you do with the bikes, etc., etc., and Dan through your team as well. So thank you very much, and thank you, Steve, for keeping us in order and ensuring, of course, that Adam was able to join us this evening as well. So thank you, and thank you, councillors.